Hey everybody, and welcome to the Clairity Podcast, episode 1. I'm Claire, and today's episode is entitled Lyme Disease and Mormonism. Now, I know you're thinking, what on earth do those two things have to do with each other? Let me tell you this. If it wasn't for Mormonism and my Mormon roots and growing up Mormon, I would not have been spiritually equipped to handle the throes of Lyme disease. I would not have been ready to cope with a trial that strips you of everything. But also, on the other hand, if it wasn't for Lyme disease, I never would have left the Mormon church. I know that sounds like an oxymoron. And if you want to find out my reasoning for this, you're going to want to stay tuned and tune into the full episode here on the Clairity Podcast. Everyone has a journey they're walking. And along that road, we are met with potholes, road bumps, rain, storms, and sometimes just fog. But through it all, we're really just looking for one thing: clarity. Clarity so we can walk with confidence in that next step. There's one source I run to for that clarity. In the darkest of nights, Jesus offers me light that shines through even the thickest storms. Welcome to the Clairity Podcast, where we find clarity through the one who saves us all. I want to just open this episode with a really quick disclaimer. I'm about to share my story here, and when I refer to Mormons or Christians or that group of people, I want to make it very clear that there are so many kind and good and God-fearing people in both of these groups. And so when I express negative experiences with these groups, that does not discredit the good experiences or the good people that I have ran into throughout my experiences. It doesn't discredit that at all. It's funny because Mormons are always like, oh, Christians, they don't have it all figured out. And Christians are, oh, Mormons, they're not Christian. And at the end of the day, my answer to that is this: there are a lot of Mormons that are not Christian. And there's also a lot of Christians that are not even remotely Christian. So it doesn't really matter what group of people we're talking about here. There's good people who are God-fearing and trying to follow Jesus. And then there's people who are not trying to do those things. And so it's not necessarily about the group. And when I share my negative experiences, it's simply to say that these are my experiences and they're real. But it also doesn't downplay the good people and the good experiences, because those exist as well across all boards with people. So I just want to make that really clear before we get into that episode. Also, just talking about negativity. Usually when I share my story, I usually get responses like, oh, well, that's your own private hell, or, you know, your story's really negative. And oh, to live in a world that labels truth as negativity. I was recently a guest on a podcast called I Love the Way You Lyme, and I loved what the host said. She said that you can always deny facts, but you cannot deny people's stories. I mean, you can, but you're not going to get as much on your side if you're sitting there denying people's stories, because that's their experience. Everybody has a story, and we should be able to share our stories with each other. I love this quote by Shakespeare, and it says, "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak knits up the overwrought heart and bids it break." It is words left unspoken that break hearts. So it's really important that we tell our stories. And when we share our stories with people, we're not just claiming, oh, that's negative, because if somebody had a negative experience, that is their experience and it is real. It's so real. And so I just wanted to point that out going into this episode, that this is my story. And I know there are people out there who have stories just like mine, and they're going to need to hear this so that they feel less alone. So on that note, let's get into this. So if you haven't figured it out by now, my name is Claire. I am 26 years old. I am the manager of my family's farm. We live on a small family farm and homestead. We raise every animal under the sun, and just very big garden. And it's funny because I never would have seen myself as a farmer about even 5 or 6 years ago. When I graduated high school, I was going to go to college. I was going to graduate a vocal performance major, and I wanted to do music. I wanted to open a vocal studio. I wanted to teach kids how to sing. And, you know, you make your plans, and then God moves and he does his work. And so all my plans went kerplooey at a very young age. And I ended up on the farm with my parents about 6 years ago. And I fell in love with farming along the way. And I never, ever would have seen myself doing that because I went from an industry of sequin dresses and a face full of makeup to an industry of putting on jeans and a t-shirt, doing whatever your hair does that morning and getting down and dirty with the cucumbers and the tomatoes and the pigs and the goats. And I fell in love with that lifestyle. And so that's what I do now. I am also the president and founder of a small nonprofit organization where we send care packages to the chronically ill all over the US. And it's called the Chronically Care Project. And that is a passion project of mine. And I absolutely love it. So that is a little bit about me. I'm really just your average young girl trying to find my way in this world. And the unique thing about me is that I was raised as a Mormon. People ask me all the time, how did you get to where you are now? How did you get this far? Like, where did you go from point A to point B? How did you get there? And I would describe it as stepping stones. The Lord laid the stepping stones for my path very early on in my life. And because he laid those stepping stones, it feels like a big jump to people where it's like point A, point B, like bottom of the mountain to mountaintop. But the Lord has been laying stepping stones from the time I was really, really young. And so let me give you a little bit of an insight into growing up Mormon. I absolutely loved growing up Mormon. I had a beautiful family. I was raised in a family of 6. So I had 5 older siblings. I was the youngest. And I grew up in just a really God-fearing family. We went to church every Sunday. I loved that the Mormon church really instilled in my family the importance of getting into God's word and studying his word. I remember even when I was just a little girl at about like 6 a.m., we would all pile on mom and dad's bed and we would read the word of God. And I loved that. Like, okay. So when I was little, I probably didn't love it so much because getting up early was rough. Like as a child, you're like, oh, why do we have to get up so early? But I just really remember that instilling the importance of getting into God's word and scripture study as a young girl. And that's something that I'm super, like one of the many things I'm super grateful for growing up Mormon. When I was a little girl, I always felt safe. I was always protected. I had parents that were very loving, very attentive to my needs as a child, but also just, they always knew where I was. They were very proactive in my life. And I think the most important thing about growing up Mormon is that my parents taught me about Jesus. They taught me about God. They taught me how God sees me. They taught me that I can pray when I need help. They taught me to look for answers in God's word. So many wonderful things that I grew up with as a Mormon. And so like, it's funny because when I say I grew up Mormon, I usually get this response of like, what? Like I grew up in some like really bad situation. And that always makes me laugh because I had a wonderful childhood. I didn't grow up in any bad situation. There was no like, I wasn't raised to be controlled by my leaders or by my father or anything like that. I had a loving father. I had a loving mother. I had a beautiful childhood. And so growing up Mormon is really not as bad as everybody thinks it is. And Mormons are just like everybody else. I'm sure there are homes that are really rough growing up they're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which if you're a Christian coming on here for the first time, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Mormons are one and the same. They refer to themselves as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the Mormons is kind of the nickname. And that's just what everyone knows them by, is the Mormons. Anyway, there were so many good things about growing up Mormon. And even when I was young, I loved church. So let me teach you guys some Mormon vocabulary is what I'm going to call it for a minute here. So my friends who I love dearly, who are Christian, that they've never heard of Mormonism, or they've heard of Mormonism, but they don't really know all the lingo. So when you're growing up Mormon in Utah, you go to church with the people in your neighborhood. And because there's so many Mormons in Utah and so many churches on every corner that are Mormon churches, they break off the people you go to church to based off of the people that live near you. And that is called your ward. And then outside of your ward are like the neighborhoods surrounding your neighborhood. And that's called your stake. Okay. And the reason why they split it into these wards and stakes is simply because the church saw it as a way for neighbors to look out for their neighbors. So like it tells us in the Bible that we're supposed to love God and love our neighbors. And so if you're going to church with all your neighbors, then like the ideal is that you're looking out for your neighbors, you're checking in on them, you're bringing meals to people who need help in the neighborhood. And that's why we have wards and stakes. And then as far as church goes, the Mormons feel it very important that we meet to worship God as a family, but then also as certain age groups, but then also as men and women. We have our church meeting when we go to church, and that's where the families meet. And then there are groups that separate. So when I refer to priesthood and relief society, that's the separation between men and women going to their meetings and meeting as men and women. Okay. So those are their groups, priesthood and relief society. And then there's young men's and young women's, and that's just the younger of like the teenagers that are going to meet in their groups. And so when I use all these terms like relief society and young women's and young men's, those are all Mormon terms that basically just describe how we meet together as church members and how we gather to be able to worship God together. Okay, so jumping from my childhood, I was about 12 years old when my dad became a bishop of the Mormon church. Mormons also believe we are a church of volunteers. That's the phrase I grew up with. Basically means that the clergy is not paid. We are volunteers. So somebody in the stake presidency will generally call someone to be in a bishop position. So there's no like college education or anything, which I realize that most Christians would think that's crazy because it's really important that your pastor has been to college and has all this education. And it's just not like that in the Mormon church because the Mormon church is a church of volunteers. And so you'll be called to perform this calling, whether that's teaching Sunday school or bishop or leading the choir or whatever it is. And you can either choose to take it and to say, yes, I definitely want to do this. I want to serve God in this capacity. Or let's say special circumstances, your wife has cancer or somebody in your family is sick or there's some kind of an experience going on, then you can say no as well. So the Mormon church is a church of volunteers. So when I was 12 years old, my dad was called and ordained to be the bishop of our ward. And I remember back to that time in my life when we really didn't think he was going to be called to this position. My family was very much like a nobody family. My dad had callings in other areas down in Provo, Utah and stuff like that. And so it came as a shock to all of us when dad got called to be the bishop. And we knew this was going to be hard because dad was taking on a position of leadership. But we also felt like God had called him into this position of leadership. And my mom and me and my brother and sister who lived at home at the time, we were all very supportive. And so I remember when I was about 12 years old, that's when dad was ordained to be the bishop of our ward. And I will never forget that day because number one, it was Father's Day, of course. Like that is basically the Father's Day to remember when your dad becomes a bishop. And I just remember it being a meeting where the past bishop and his counselors bore witness of Christ. And then my dad and the people that were called as his counselors basically did the same. And then we went to my dad's ordination. He was ordained to be bishop. And that moment in time changed my life in a way I never, ever, ever imagined that it would. Sitting in that chair in that classroom, hearing my father be ordained, I was just a kid. And so I didn't fully fathom what was going to happen. I was a kid. And so I just was like, I know that dad's going to be gone a lot more. I know he's going to be serving these people at this capacity, but we're just going to roll with it as a family. And I knew that my mom was very supportive too. So what I didn't know is that life as a bishop's daughter, there's a big shift amongst your peers when you become a bishop's daughter. I don't fully know the reasoning for that, but I can tell you that people expect you to be one of two things when you're a bishop's daughter in the Mormon church. They either expect you to be the best of the best, like absolutely perfect, goody two-shoes, Molly Mormon girl, perfect. or they expect you to be the worst of the worst. Like we're talking like sneaking out in the middle of the night to sleep with your boyfriend or whatever bad thing. You're either the best or you're the worst. And they don't allow much room for anything in between. And so for me, I was neither. I was not a horrible kid. In fact, I tried really hard to be a good girl. I always had a love for God that I knew he was always there for me. I didn't want to disappoint God in my younger years, essentially. And so I was a good kid, but I also was not perfect. I was a teenager. I was actually like entering into my teenage years. So of course I wasn't perfect. And so because I was not perfect, nor was I horrible, I was targeted. That word, targeted. And my family was targeted. And we had so many experiences within that ward that really shaped me into who I am today. Not because we had good experiences, but because we had so many emotional traumas within that ward. When I was in high school, I remember my dad being bishop leaking into me going to high school. So like I remember making choices and trying my best to be my best, and my peers in high school that I wasn't even going to church with them. They would say things to me like, Claire, aren't you the bishop's daughter? You're not supposed to be doing things like that. And to me at the time, I was just like, why would you sit and nitpick at me when you're not even in my church? You're not even in my same ward. But people would make comments like that to me all the time, basically passing this judgment of, oh, well, you're the bishop's daughter. You're not supposed to be doing this. You're not supposed to be doing that. And as a result, rumors fly. When you are somebody who wants to follow God and wants to keep his commandments and abide by his laws, other people don't like that when you're in a church. They do not like it. And they say you're self-righteous, and they say that you're this and you're that. And if that doesn't get to you, if their comments about self-righteousness doesn't get to you, then they just decide to string gossip. They string lies, and lies travel so much faster than truths do. And essentially that's what happened to me and my family, where there were families in our ward that did not like what we were standing for. And so as a result, they went after us. They told lies. Gossip spread like wildfire, and my family's good name was slandered in that ward. And we were told that we weren't really supposed to share our experience, the truth of our experience, unless somebody asked us. And of course, nobody asked us, because all of the people who were listening to those rumors were already listening to the rumors. And they already believed the lie. And so it was at this time in my life where I could not understand the lies that were flying. I remember my dad coming home as a bishop one time, and he came home from a ward council meeting, which is basically just all of the main people in presidencies. So the young women's president, the young men's president, the bishop, all of the people in those presidencies getting together and talking about the needs of the ward. And he told me that my young women's president said that she told the girls in my ward that they had to forgive me for what I said to them. And my dad was like, what did Claire say to them? And when she told them, my dad came home and asked me about it. And when he repeated what she had accused me of saying, I was like, I've never, ever, ever said that about anybody. That would be horrible if I was going to say that about somebody. And I remember just bawling my eyes out that night thinking, why are people trying to frame me for all these things that I'm not doing? And, when I told my story later, as I got older into my 18, 19, 20, I would tell it to other Mormons and they'd be like, oh, Claire, that's just high school drama. And I'd be like, but it didn't feel like high school drama at the time. It was really, really hard because all these people were slandering us, and there wasn't anybody sticking up for us, who in the end, we were just the little guy. And I remember at this time in my life, one of my favorite Bible verses had become Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with you wherever you go. And I know I just mixed like 3 different translations there. But I loved that verse. And this is a really crucial thing to note here. It was at this time in my life that God was not just like, well, Claire, that's it. These people have treated you bad. Leave Mormonism. Get out of the church. That is not how the Lord was communicating to me. Instead, the Lord was giving me stepping stones, and that verse was a stepping stone. He told me, Claire, have strength and have courage. I'm here giving you that strength and that courage. And what these people are doing is wrong. But you know what? I am here to give you that strength and that courage. So take courage, hold your head up, get back up, keep going. I am right here with you. And I just remember feeling that so strongly in the midst of all these lies and this slander, and feeling comforted by that. It was also during this time that I really learned the personal power of prayer, because I grew up my whole life with my parents teaching me about prayer. And I always prayed like before meals, before I went to bed, when I woke up in the morning. But this is the first time in my life that I was able to get down on my knees and ask God for help, because this was really hard. And the words that people were using against me, against my mom and my dad, because we were trying to stand for God and encourage people to live pure lives, to live good lives, to live honest lives. People didn't like us for that. But God told me to have courage. And that's what I needed at that time. And there was verse after verse after verse that he kept giving me that was a repeat of that message to me. It was never just, all right, Claire, you're done. Leave the Mormon church. It was, have courage. Seek me. And I felt that. And did I understand it fully back then? Of course not. But I'm so grateful for that stepping stone at that time of my life. And even now I'm grateful for those experiences that were so hard emotionally, but I got through them in the strength of the Lord. So after all these things happened with my dad being bishop, things got so bad with the way that people treated me that I had to change schools. I remember going to my mom and saying, Mom, I'm either going to be a high school dropout or I am getting out of this high school. I cannot handle this anymore, and I don't want to handle it anymore. And my mom and my dad, who again were always loving, supportive listeners, they basically said, okay, Claire, like, we're going to help you find another school. So that's when they signed me up for a private Christian school. And I absolutely was terrified to go to this school, but I was also so excited because I remember reading the honor code and the mission statement of this school and feeling like, you know what? This is what I want. I want to follow God so closely that I learn what that takes, what that looks like in my daily life, not just going to church on Sundays and worshiping God in church, but like, this is going to teach me what the gospel looks like in my everyday life. And I was so excited for that, but I was also really nervous because I had gone to public school my whole life. I went to this private Christian school, and the one thing it taught me is that there's no such thing as a perfect school. There are bullies in every school. There are teachers in every school that are wonderful, and there are teachers in every school that are not so wonderful. And there's no just ideal situation when you're going to any school. And so I had some wonderful experiences at that school. I really learned how to apply the gospel in my everyday life. It wasn't just a Sunday thing anymore. The gospel had now become something that I did every day of my life. Prayer was every day of my life. Modesty was every day of my life. Being in God's word was every day of my life. And it was in practical ways that God was suddenly influencing me all the time. And it wasn't just on Sunday. It wasn't when I just met with the young women's group throughout the week. It was every day. And I loved that. I absolutely loved that. I met some good people. I had some wonderful teachers that really encouraged me and that really changed my life for the better. And I had some teachers that, again, were stressful, to say the least. I cried my fair share of tears in that school as I struggled with academics. And it was hard. Like, I did hard things at that school and I loved it. Was it perfect? No, but I loved it. And I learned how to put the gospel into action at that time in my life. So it was also at this time in my life that my mom, she had health problems probably all growing up. So almost in my head, I remember it being that almost every winter, by the time I was maybe, 13, 14, maybe even 12, my mom would get sick every winter. And then as the winter went by, she would kind of come out of it. And it was around this time when I was going to my private school that mom went down, and she went down for the long run. She didn't get better. In fact, all that I could see was my mom's health going downhill, like lower and lower and lower, like symptom after symptom after symptom after symptom. And we didn't understand what was going on. We couldn't find a single doctor that could understand what was going on. And I just remember going to school and feeling like I wasn't sure if mom was going to live or be alive when I came home the next day. And that was my reality for my years in private school. And I don't even know how many people were aware of my reality when I was in private school. That was my reality. I was always afraid that I was going to go home and find out that mom wasn't here anymore. And I remember going home and seeing my mom so sick and thinking, why did this happen? Why is she in so much pain? Why don't the doctors have answers? My mom had every symptom that you could ever imagine. She couldn't get out of bed for weeks, months, possibly years. And she just kept getting sicker and sicker. When you hear the screams of your mother because she is in so much pain in the middle of the night, it changes your whole life and it changes your whole perspective. And it was really at this time that I learned something important about the church. And it was that long-term illness is not recognized in the church as a trial that requires help, care, or compassion. Instead, it's usually met with judgment, gossip, avoidance, and abandonment. That was a realization that slowly started creeping in on me as I was watching my mom slowly slip away. I didn't understand why there were so many church members who didn't want to give a helping hand. I'd grown up in this church my whole life where we learned about the love of Jesus Christ. We learned about helping people, serving our neighbors, loving God, loving others. And we always talked about, bringing meals to people who need it. And I started to see that when you have a long-term illness, not only do people not know, but then when you tell them about it, they don't handle it well. And so at first, you get meals here and there at first. You get meals. And you might even make a friend that will show up once, maybe twice, 3 times if you're really lucky. And then after that, all the people slowly start to slip away. And I really saw that with my mom, where suddenly we weren't super liked in the ward we were in anyway, because we had already experienced being slandered. But then my mom got sick and everybody just disappeared. And that was really hard on my family. It was really hard on me as someone in high school. But then I slowly saw my father suffering from seeing all the pain that his wife was in. And I was scared. I was really scared for my mother's life. But I went on as normal of a teenage life as I could live. I went to prom. I did all the teenage things, went out on Friday nights, hung out with my friends, and then I graduated from high school. And after I graduated from high school, I went to college. I received a music scholarship from the college that I chose to go to. And I was really excited to start pursuing my dreams in music, but I was also really nervous because home was always a safe place for me, still is a safe place for me. And I was also nervous because my health started to decline at this age. When I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school, I basically started to notice major things like brain fog. I couldn't remember things. I had really terrible menstrual pain. So every time I had a period, I was like in crippling pain, to the point where I had a really hard time focusing on anything in school. And there were times that I had to have friends drive me home from school. And I remember like other friends kind of chuckling at that, like, Claire, like everyone has cramps. And I was like, this is not cramps. Like something is wrong. But I was embarrassed at the time too, because it was those kinds of symptoms. So I just kind of would quietly, I'd get my friends to drive me home from school. I'd get people to bring me ibuprofen, and my health just started going down slowly, slowly, slowly. Even just symptoms, like I always had tremors in my hands in high school. And to me, that was always normal. I was like, my hands always shake. It's just what they do. But that was a symptom. And so I decided to go to college anyway. I was like, I'm not going to let these things stop me. And it's probably just a fluke. Like, it'll pass. And I went to college, and from college, everything exploded in my life. It was just one big dynamite explosion waiting to happen. I went to college. My brain fog got worse. I couldn't remember anything my tutors tried to explain to me about music theory that I truly didn't understand anyway. I had pain in my feet and my heels, so I had a really hard time walking from class to class. I couldn't remember things to even put my car in park. I remember frantically calling my parents one day and telling them I couldn't get the key out of the ignition, and I had to get to class, and I can't get the key out of the ignition. I think I broke the car. And my mom just goes, "Claire, did you put it in park?" And I was like, "Oh, nope, forgot to put it in park." That was not an abnormal occurrence. I ran into a wall in a parking garage once because I forgot to put my car in park. So that was not just a one-time thing that I forgot to do that. I couldn't, even just remembering passwords. I had really bad heart palpitations. My heart just always felt like it was about to jump out of my chest and run down the hall. And because I had bad heart palpitations, of course, I had terrible anxiety. I had terrible depression. I would wake up in the middle of the night in panic attacks. And I was alone because I was in college. I was living in an apartment. And I was just I couldn't even pinpoint it as a panic attack. I didn't know that's what it was. So I just kept having symptom after symptom after symptom. My body temperature couldn't regulate. I always had very low body temperature. My hair was falling out. I had terrible skin problems all over my body. I was always trying to cover my acne, my skin problems. And it just got worse and worse and worse. My period pain got worse. And it was even worse because I didn't have anybody to help me with my period pain. And I just had to down the pain meds for it. And all this was happening while I knew my mom, of course, is still suffering at home. And I just felt like everything was falling apart, and I couldn't handle everything I'd been given. I was taking a lot of credit hours. I was trying to show up to class every day. I didn't have the strength to do it. And I barely had time to take a shower and eat, let alone manage how poorly I was feeling. And I always was kind of just a person that I'm just going to push through this. I'm just going to power through it. And so I did. I tried to power through it. But when I went home on fall break, actually before I left for college, I had gone in to my mom's Lyme doctor, and he did a whole bunch of blood tests on me. So then when I came back from college on fall break, he basically gave me the results of my blood test. My mom had been diagnosed with Lyme disease probably about a year prior to this experience that I was going through. And so this is how we knew which doctor to go to at the time. He basically broke the news to me that my mold levels were really high. My mycoplasma levels were really high. Just all these things that were absolute indicators of Lyme disease. And that's when I got my Lyme test. And I knew I was going to go back to college, and I would find out my results as to whether or not I had Lyme disease while I was at school. So I went back to school, still just trying to power through all these things that are really, really hard. And I got a call from my mom one day, and she basically told me that my test results had come back and I had tested positive for chronic Lyme disease. And at that point, we had a doctor that was working with my mom, and his advice to us was she can stay at college or she can come home and start treatment. But if she stays at college, it might be too late at that point. That was really hard for me to hear as an 18-year-old girl. And I opted to start treatment in college. I realized that wasn't really an option, but we made it an option. And so that's when things got worse from there. I had to sleep with oxygen tubes. I had to record all of my symptoms on a scale of 1 to 10 every single day on a spreadsheet for my doctor to see. I had to take all of my vitals and record all of my vitals every single day. And I had to do this on top of all of my college work, and all of my classes, all the tests I had to take, all the studying I had to do. And at that point, I really just started to fall apart because I couldn't handle the load of it all. I was trying to take care of me, but I was also trying to pursue this life that society was telling me I needed to be pursuing. You need to go to college. You need to have a college degree. You need to educate yourself. And that plan for life wasn't working for me. It wasn't working for me, and my body was failing me in my ability to do that. So my mom called me one day and she said, Claire, if you want us to come get you, we'll take you home. If you want to stay at college, we respect that. But if you want us to come get you, we'll take you home. And I remember feeling like God just told me, Claire, you came here, you did what you needed to do here, and you can go home now. And I remember just like being so grateful that that was my answer. The semester wasn't over. I felt like a failure. I really didn't want to go home. I wanted to finish what I started, but I couldn't do it. I was in so much pain. And again, this goes back to the theme of I didn't feel very supported by any of the Mormons in my community. I went to church every Sunday. I went to my ward in that area. I didn't have a bishop that we could even get a hold of at the time to say, hey, I'm really struggling and I need some help. There was one or two people that were very kind and very helpful. My mentor, for one, he was very helpful. He was part of the Mormon church. And so he, as a disciple of Jesus and just the loving guy that he was very helpful at the time. And he offered me some compassion. But like the stories of compassion are just so few and far between because I felt so alone. I didn't know where to go for help, which in my mind shouldn't have been happening in a church that claims to have this community that we're all out serving all the time. But like all of those things about religion were in the back of my mind at the time because I was just suffering and I just wanted to go home. So my parents came and they got me. And I remember when I came home from college, my hair was falling out. I had a big rash across my face. I had lost probably about 15 pounds. And like, I'm really tall and I'm not very big built. And so to lose 15 pounds for me, I was like very thin, like abnormally thin, not like, oh, look, you lost all this weight. No, like, whoa, like your spine is protruding out of your back thin. And I remember just coming home and falling on the floor and sobbing and just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so glad this phase of my life is over. Like I'll go back someday when I can handle it. But right now, I can't. Thank you for joining me in this episode of the Clairity Podcast. I'm sure you guys are dying to know what happens next in my story. And so if you want to find out, you're going to have to tune into our next episode next week, episode 2, to find out the second half of my story and all of the incredible lessons I've learned along the way. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll see you next week.